I woke up to the sterile glare of fluorescent lights and the silence that follows anesthesia, only to realize hours later that no one had come for me. Not my son, not my daughter, not even the woman I once called the love of my life. The nurse wheeled me to the lobby after the doctor signed me out, and there I sat with a plastic bag of painkillers and the bill folded in an envelope. The sliding doors opened again and again, families greeting their loved ones with flowers, with laughter, with hands extended. But for me there was nothing. Just a phone that didn't ring, and an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with the stitches. My name is Arthur Langley. I am 71 years old, a retired construction foreman from Indiana. For 40 years, I built other people's homes, pouring foundations, raising beams, fixing roofs when storms tore them apart. But that night in the hospital lobby, I didn't feel like the man who had once stood 10 feet above the ground on scaffolding hammer in hand. I felt like someone who had been quietly written out of his own family's story. I remember staring at my hands, knuckles swollen and skin calloused, remembering how those same hands had once lifted my children onto my shoulders at the county fair. How I'd carved their initials into the oak tree in the backyard, promising they would never be forgotten. And yet here I was, forgotten. The sliding doors whooshed open again, a woman in a winter coat rushing to embrace her father. He laughed through the oxygen tube under his nose. I looked away, my throat tightening, the weight of abandonment pressing harder than any plaster bag of cement I'd carried in my youth. When the nurse asked me, "Mr. Langley, is someone on the way?" I lied. I said, "Yes, they're just running late." Her eyes told me she didn't believe a word. Hours passed. The waiting room emptied until it was just me, the janitor pushing his mop across the linoleum, and the vending machine humming. I pressed my dollar into the slot and bought a lukewarm coffee in a paper cup. That was my company. Not my son, not my daughter, not my blood. The next morning, my granddaughter Emily appeared. She was 19, her hair pulled back, wearing a sweatshirt with the logo of her community college. Her eyes widened when she saw me slumped in that chair. "Grandpa, why didn't they come for you?" she whispered. She hugged me like she feared I might disappear, and in that embrace I felt the sharp contrast between her warmth and the cold absence of her parents. I shook my head. "Don't ask Emily. They had their reasons." She looked around at the empty lobby. No reason's good enough. Later that evening, back at my small house with its sagging porch and the smell of pine cleaner lingering in the air, I sat in my armchair and studied the framed photographs on the mantel. There was one of my son, Michael, in his Little League uniform, grinning with a gap where his front teeth had been. Another of my daughter, Karen, in her prom dress, smiling like the world was opening just for her. And then the wedding photo me with my late wife, Margaret, the woman who steadied me through the storms. She was gone now, and so was the bridge she once kept strong between me and the children. Emily brewed tea in the kitchen, her voice drifting in. "Do you need anything else, Grandpa?" "No, sweetheart. Just sit with me a while." She joined me on the couch, and we talked quietly, our words filling the silence left behind by everyone else. She told me about her classes, about a professor who inspired her, about her dreams of becoming a nurse. I nodded, half listening, half drifting into memory, remembering the nights I'd worked double shifts to pay for braces and school clothes, never once thinking they'd leave me behind when I needed them most. The injustice of it all burned slow like a log smoldering in the fireplace. I had always believed that family was a circle that no matter how frayed it closed back in when times grew hard. But sitting there with Emily's hand on mine, I knew the circle had been broken. My own son hadn't called, not once. My daughter sent a text 2 days later that read, "Glad you're okay." That was it. No visit, no explanation. Just cold distance. That night, I opened my desk drawer. The lamp cast a yellow glow over the wood grain, and I pulled out the old folder with my will inside. The paper smelled faintly of ink and time the typewritten lines naming Michael and Karen as heirs. My chest tightened as I stared at their names. They had abandoned me in the moment I needed them most. What legacy did I owe them now? I felt Emily's presence behind me. She stood in the doorway, her face uncertain. "Grandpa, are you all right?" I slid the papers back into the folder, my mind sharper than it had been in years. "I'm fine, Emily. But things are going to change." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The words would come in their own time. The ink would tell their story soon enough. But in that moment, in the quiet of the house, with the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic outside, a decision was already burning its way through me. They had left me at the hospital, stripped me of the dignity a father deserves. Now I would write my own ending, one that would remind them that even an old man left alone still holds the power to decide what remains after he is gone. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The folder with my old will stayed on the desk, its edges frayed from years of being pulled out and shoved back in. I left it there that night, unopened, but not forgotten, as I lay down in the bed I had shared with Margaret until the cancer took her. The ceiling creaked with the weight of summer heat still trapped in the rafters, and every sound seemed to remind me of what had happened. My son's silence, my daughter's cold text, the image of myself sitting in that lobby with a paper cup of bitter coffee while families walked past carrying balloons and flowers. It pressed on me until sleep became a fitful, jagged thing. Morning light spilled through the blinds, cutting thin stripes across the floor. I rose slowly, stiff from surgery and from age, and shuffled into the kitchen. Emily had already brewed a pot of coffee. She was humming softly to herself, trying to brighten the air. She looked up when I entered her eyes, still carrying that question she hadn't dared to ask. "You didn't eat much last night," she said. "I wasn't hungry." "You're still not hungry." I gave her a thin smile and took the cup she handed me. The steam fogged my glasses. I watched it swirl and thought of all the mornings I'd woken before dawn to pack a lunch pail, the thermos rattling with black coffee that tasted like grit, but kept me moving through 12-hour shifts. I thought of the pride I once carried in my chest, building homes for strangers who would never know my name, but who would raise their children inside walls I had nailed together. And I thought of how that pride had turned to shame, sitting in that hospital lobby, no one coming for me. I sat at the table staring at the cracked linoleum. Emily tried to fill the silence with talk about her studies about a professor who reminded her of me. "He doesn't take excuses," she said. "He says the only way to respect yourself is to show up every single day." I nodded. "That sounds about right." But my mind was far from her classroom. It drifted back to a winter years ago when Michael had broken his arm sledding. I had driven him through a blizzard to the same hospital, praying every mile that the roads wouldn't close. When they set the bone and wrapped his arm, he cried from the pain, and I held him close, promising it would be all right. I stayed by his bed until the color returned to his face. I never once left him alone. That memory cut sharper now, because when it was my turn to be weak, He chose absence. The betrayal ran deeper than anger. It settled like a stone in my stomach, heavy and cold. I wasn't just forgotten. I was discarded. That word gnawed at me as I stirred sugar into my coffee. Discarded. Like an old tool too rusted to be useful. Emily studied me as though she could hear the word rattling inside my head. "You don't deserve this, Grandpa," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked out the window at the yard I had tended for decades. The oak tree still stood thick and steady, with initials carved deep into its bark. My children's initials preserved in wood even if their loyalty had rotted. I thought of Margaret again, her laugh that used to warm the house, her voice insisting that family was stronger than pride. If she had lived, maybe none of this would have happened. She had been the bridge, and without her the distance between me and the children had widened until there was nothing left to cross. After breakfast, I eased myself into the living room chair and opened the folder again. The will stared back at me, every word written in black and white, binding my legacy to the ones who had left me behind. My chest tightened. My fingers trembled as I traced the lines with the edge of my nail. The power in those pages was mine, yet it had been granted to them without condition, without question. Emily came in carrying her textbooks, settling onto the couch to study. Her presence steadied me. Her loyalty was unshaken, pure-born, not of obligation, but of love. She had come for me when no one else had. She had seen me sitting there in that chair at the hospital, and she had refused to let me vanish into the cracks of silence. I watched her turn the pages of her book, her lips moving softly as she read. And in that moment, I knew. A thought formed sharp and undeniable, as if it had been waiting all along. The will could change. Not tonight, not in haste, but soon. Those who had abandoned me would learn that legacy wasn't owed by blood alone. It was earned in the moments you showed up, in the hours you held someone's hand, in the nights you proved that family meant more than words. I closed the folder, the decision burning steady inside me. But even as I resolved it, anger welled up again. Anger at the memory of my son's voice, dismissive and cold, in our last conversation before surgery. "You'll be fine, Dad," he had said. "It's just routine. Don't make a big deal of it." I hadn't made a big deal. I had asked only that he be there when I woke. He wasn't. Now the air in the room felt heavy. Emily looked up from her book, sensing something she couldn't name. "Grandpa," she asked. I leaned back in the chair, the old wood groaning beneath me, and let the words slip before I could stop them. "They won't see a dime. Not one." Emily froze her book halfway closed in her lap. "What do you mean?" I met her eyes. The silence stretched. The clock ticked loud on the mantel. My voice came out low, almost a growl. "I'm going to change everything." The room seemed to contract around those words, pulling tight, as if the walls themselves knew a storm was coming. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on me after I spoke, her expression caught between worry and disbelief. She searched my face as though she needed to be sure I meant it. I did. The silence stretched until the phone on the counter rang sharp and jarring in the quiet house. I reached for it slowly, my body still aching from the surgery. On the screen, Michael's name glowed. I answered, bracing myself. "Dad." His voice came flat, almost impatient. "I heard you got home. Everything okay?" I let the words settle before I replied. "I got home because Emily came for me." "You didn't." He sighed, a hollow sound. "We couldn't make it. Karen had things going on, and well, you know how it is. Busy. The words scraped my throat raw. You left me sitting in that hospital lobby like a man nobody claimed. There was a pause. Then his tone sharpened. Don't make this into drama, Dad. You're fine now. That's what matters. What mattered to him was that I hadn't died, that the inconvenience was over. I clenched the phone tighter, my hand trembling. Emily stood nearby, watching her lips pressed together. I gave you everything I had, I said, voice low but steady. Every paycheck, every hour of my back-breaking work. And you couldn't give me one evening. Dad, he cut in irritation rising. Don't start guilt-tripping me. I've got bills. I've got responsibilities. Life doesn't stop because you had surgery. The line went silent after he hung up the tone flat in my ear. My chest burned not from the stitches but from the dismissal. Emily walked over and touched my shoulder gently. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't answer. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the mantel where the photographs mocked me with smiles from another lifetime. The days that followed carried more small injuries, each one, like salt, pressed into an open wound. Karen sent a voicemail that sounded rehearsed, her voice clipped and shallow. Glad you're doing better, Dad. I'll check in when things settle down. Nothing more. She never asked what I needed. She never offered to come by. Then the mail arrived. Among the bills and catalogs was an envelope from Karen. Inside a note scribbled quickly. Since you're retired and not spending much, could you help cover tuition for Josh's next semester? He's struggling. No mention of the hospital. No question about how I was holding up. Just a request assuming I'd hand over what I had, because that was what I'd always done. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter, the paper trembling in my hands. Emily read it too, her mouth tightening into a thin line. That's not fair, she whispered. Fair. The word felt almost laughable. Life had been unfair plenty of times, but never so bitterly as this. They had left me in a hospital chair and come back only with their palms open. That evening, Michael stopped by not with flowers or food, but with a folder tucked under his arm. He stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the living room like he hadn't been there in years. Dad? He began, his tone clipped. I figured since you're not working anymore, we should go over your finances, just to keep things organized. Emily stiffened beside me. I could feel her anger simmering, but I raised a hand for her to stay quiet. My finances are my own concern, I said. Michael forced a smile, but his eyes darted to the desk where the old will lay hidden in its folder. I just want to make sure things are clear. You know, so nobody gets confused later on. The implication was heavy, unmistakable. He wanted control assurance that the inheritance would be his. Not concern for my health, not regret for leaving me behind, just calculation. I leaned back, studying him, the lines of his face harder than I remembered, his shoulders rigid. This wasn't the boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who clung to my shirt when he fell and scraped his knee. This was a man who measured worth in dollars and documents. Your sister already asked me for money, I said quietly. Neither of you asked me if I was all right. Michael's jaw tightened. We're just trying to keep things practical. Practical. That word rang cold, stripping family down to transactions. I felt Emily shift her hand, gripping my arm as though to hold me steady. I stood slowly, the ache in my side flaring, but I didn't let it show. I looked him in the eye and said, Leave. His face flushed. Dad. Leave my house. For a moment he hesitated, as though shocked I would push back. Then he turned, muttering something under his breath as he stepped out the door. The slam echoed through the house like a gunshot. The quiet that followed was heavy, but beneath it ran a current, fierce and unshakable. Emily looked at me with wide eyes, searching for words. I opened the desk drawer, pulled out the folder with the will, and laid it on the table where the lamplight fell across the bold heading, Last Will and Testament of Arthur Langley. Emily's breath caught. Grandpa. I met her gaze steady and calm, despite the storm raging in my chest. Tomorrow, I said, tapping the folder we call a lawyer. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low on the rooftops. I called the lawyer's office just after breakfast, the receiver cool against my palm. Emily sat at the table, her textbooks forgotten, her eyes fixed on me as I spoke. My name is Arthur Langley, I said. I need to make changes to my will. The secretary on the line answered politely, scheduling me for later that week. When I hung up, the quiet in the house deepened. It was the kind of silence that doesn't soothe but coils tighter with every breath, as though the walls themselves were listening. By afternoon, the phone rang again. Karen, this time. Her voice carried a brightness too sharp, like light off broken glass. Dad, I heard Michael stopped by yesterday. He said you were upset. Upset, I repeated, my voice dry. Well, you can't be angry at us forever. We have our own lives, you know. Michael said you threw him out of the house. That's not fair. Fair. There it was again, tossed at me like a stone. Was it fair to leave me in that hospital lobby, I asked. Her tone hardened. Oh, come on, Dad. Don't turn this into some tragedy. You're home now, you're alive, isn't that enough? The words burned. I could see Margaret's face in my memory, the way she used to hush the children when they got too sharp with me reminding them of respect. Without her, their words fell unchecked, as if she had been the only dam holding back their carelessness. I gave you life, I said quietly, and you gave me absence. She fell silent for a beat, then pressed on. Look, we don't want any drama. Just remember we're family. Things will work out. She hung up before I could answer. The emptiness that followed wasn't just in my ears. It spread through my chest, hollowing me out. Emily moved closer, her hand on my arm, grounding me in the present. That evening, Michael returned, this time with his wife, Linda. She carried herself like someone arriving at a negotiation, her purse clutched tight, her lips pressed thin. They didn't sit down. They stood in my living room, the air tense, as if the house itself had braced for impact. Dad, Michael began, his voice rehearsed. We're concerned. Emily says you're talking about changing things, about lawyers. That doesn't make sense. I looked at Emily. She shook her head quickly. I didn't tell them, Grandpa. Michael's eyes flashed. Then how do we know? Because people talk, families talk, and we don't want outsiders putting ideas in your head. Linda stepped forward, her voice sharper than his. Arthur, you're not well. Surgery medication, it can make you confused. It's not the time to make big decisions. Confused. The word stung. I had spent decades carrying beams, measuring foundations, calculating loads in my head, while sweat poured down my back. Confusion wasn't in my nature. Forgetfulness wasn't what drove me now. It was clarity sharper than any saw blade I had held. I rose from my chair slowly, my side aching, and said, I know exactly what I'm doing. Michael frowned, his face flushing. We've always counted on things being settled the way they were. You can't just rip it all up because you're feeling emotional. The arrogance in his tone made the air thicker. Emily bristled beside me. He's not emotional, she snapped. He's finally seeing the truth. Linda's eyes narrowed. Stay out of this, Emily. This doesn't concern you. Emily's voice trembled, but held steady. It concerns me because I was the one who showed up. None of you did. The silence that followed was jagged. I saw in their faces not shame, but calculation, as though her words were just obstacles to navigate. In that moment, memory flooded me, Christmas mornings where Michael tore open gifts without a thank you, Margaret whispering to me later that we must be patient with him, that he would grow into gratitude. He never did. I pointed to the door. Get out. Michael's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Linda's voice followed colder still. You're making a mistake that will divide this family forever. The door slammed behind them, the sound rattling through the windows. Emily stood trembling, her fists clenched, her eyes wide with fury. Grandpa, she whispered, they're going to fight you. I nodded slowly, the weight of the decision pressing heavier, but my resolve stronger than ever. I returned to the desk and opened the folder laying the will flat. The bold words stared up at me again, waiting. As I smoothed the pages, a thought struck hard, sudden and undeniable. Someone had been in the desk. The papers weren't aligned as I'd left them. The pen I always kept in the drawer lay uncapped, a faint smear of ink on the edge of the page. I looked up sharply at Emily. She saw it too, her breath catching. They were here, I said, my voice low, steady with rage. They've already tried to touch what isn't theirs. The sight of that pen lying uncapped ink staining the edge of the paper gnawed at me like rust spreading through iron. I sat frozen for a moment, my fingers hovering above the will, knowing what it meant, yet refusing to believe it. Someone had opened this drawer, someone had touched what belonged only to me. Emily's voice broke the silence. Grandpa, did you leave it like that? I shook my head slowly. No, I never leave it like this. The words scraped against my throat, each one heavier than the last. A part of me wanted to deny it, to blame forgetfulness, to call it an accident. But I knew my own habits. I capped my pens. I stacked my pages straight. Margaret used to laugh at me for it said I was tidier with paper than with my own clothes. That memory flickered bright, her voice warm in the kitchen, her hands folding laundry. The ache of it cut deeper now, because I wanted her steadying presence to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Instead, I had only the silence and Emily watching me with wide, worried eyes. Who else has been here, I asked, though I already knew. Michael had stormed out the night before. The anger on his face, the flush in his neck, the way his eyes darted towards the desk. He had been thinking about the will even then. Perhaps he came back, key in hand, slipping inside, while the house slept, searching for words that tied him to money he hadn't earned. I pressed my palms flat on the desk, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. My chest tightened, not from the stitches, but from the betrayal that grew heavier with every breath. I gave him everything I whispered more to myself than to Emily. I taught him to drive in this very yard, remember the old Ford pickup. He couldn't reach the clutch, so I worked the pedals with my foot while he steered. He laughed like the world was his. And now, my voice faltered. Emily moved closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. He doesn't deserve it, she said softly, but memory rose again unbidden. Michael as a boy climbing onto my shoulders at the 4th of July parade, waving a flag until his arms ached. Karen as a teenager crying in my truck the night her first love broke her heart, her head on my chest as I told her the pain would pass. Those moments carved deep into me made the betrayal unbearable. Because love wasn't abstract, it was built from nights awake with fevered children, from scraped knees, bandaged from bills paid with sweat and blisters. And now those same children had pried into the desk of the man who carried them, who never once left them waiting in a lobby alone. The weight of it broke something inside me. My knees gave and I sank into the chair. My hand covered my face, hot with shame and sorrow. Emily knelt beside me, clutching my arm, whispering words I couldn't hear. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt tears streak my cheeks. I wasn't supposed to outlive respect, I muttered. Emily held me tighter. You haven't. You still have me. Her words steadied me, but only just. Because beneath the collapse, beneath the pain, something sharper pressed forward. Not anger alone, but clarity. They weren't just neglectful. They were reaching, clawing, already trying to take what wasn't yet theirs. I looked down at the will again, the black ink smudged faintly by someone else's hand. And in that mark, I saw proof. Proof that blood could turn to greed. Proof that love could curdle into entitlement. The sound of gravel crunching outside broke the silence. Emily's head snapped up. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. Her face drained of color. "It's them," she whispered. Michael's truck sat in the driveway, Karen's car behind it. Both of them stepping out, their voices already raised, carrying through the humid evening air. I rose slowly, the ache in my side flaring, but my resolve harder than the pain. Emily looked at me, fear mixing with determination. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I closed the folder carefully, pressing it flat against my chest like a shield. "I'm going to hear what they've come to take this time." The knock on the door came sharp, almost violent. Michael's voice followed, loud and commanding. "Dad, open up. We need to talk. Now." Emily's hand tightened on mine, her pulse quick against my skin. I set the will down on the table, my hand lingering on it for just a moment longer, then moved toward the door. My breath came steady. Every memory, every betrayal, every scar of love turned sour, burning in my veins. I pulled the door open. Michael and Karen stood there in the fading light, their faces hard, their eyes fixed not on me, but on the folder behind me on the table. Michael's eyes locked on the folder, while Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp and urgent. "Dad, we know what you're thinking. You can't just rewrite everything because you're upset. That's not how family works." Emily stood at my side. Her arms crossed, her glare cutting through the dusk. "Family works by showing up," she said, her voice steady. "And you didn't." Michael ignored her. His jaw tightened as he fixed on me. "We're not here to argue. We just need to make sure nothing reckless happens. You've had surgery. You're vulnerable." The word struck me like a nail hammered into rotten wood. Vulnerable. I'd spent my life holding beams steady against the wind-bracing walls so families could sleep without fear. Vulnerability had never defined me. But now my own children tried to use it as leverage to paint me as weak enough to be handled. Karen's tone softened in a way that felt practiced. "Dad, you've always wanted us to have stability. That's all we're asking for you to keep things the way they've always been. It's what Mom would have wanted." Her mention of Margaret jolted me, memory rushing back. I saw her at the kitchen table years ago, smoothing Michael's hair when he sulked about chores, reminding me not to be too hard on him. I saw her holding Karen close after a high school heartbreak, whispering that family forgives. Margaret had been the thread that stitched us together, and without her the fabric had torn. Now they used her name like a tool, like a crowbar to pry open my will. "I know what your mother wanted," I said quietly. "She wanted respect. She wanted loyalty. She wanted love that didn't have a price tag." The silence thickened. Michael's lips thinned, his eyes narrowing. Karen shifted restless, her hands clenching at her sides. I turned from them, walking back to the table. My steps were slow, deliberate, but inside me something new had taken root. The collapse I'd felt earlier, the tears and the weight of betrayal, had burned themselves out. What remained was not weakness, but resolve, hard and sharp. I placed my hand on the folder and felt its weight heavier than paper should be. It wasn't just words on a page. It was my life condensed, my legacy, the final testament of who I chose to trust. And I knew then that I would not leave it in their hands. When I turned back, my voice had changed. Stronger, steadier, carrying the quiet finality of steel set in concrete. This house, this land, this legacy, none of it belongs to you by right. It belongs to the people who stand when others walk away. Michael's face reddened. You can't cut us out. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what kind of fight this will start? I met his stare without flinching, then let it start. The words hung between us like a crack of thunder vibrating through the room. Emily exhaled a sound, halfway between relief and fear. Karen's eyes darted toward the folder again. She stepped forward, her hand twitching like she might snatch it from the table. Emily moved instantly, planting herself between her aunt and the desk. "Don't," she said, her voice low, trembling with fury. Karen stopped, her face twisting. "You're poisoning him against us." "No," Emily shot back. "You did that yourselves." The air bristled with anger, years of unspoken resentment boiling over. For a moment I saw them not as my children, but as strangers, intruders in my home, their features hardened by greed. It should have broken me further. Instead, it hardened something inside. I straightened, squaring my shoulders despite the pain in my side. My body may have been fragile, but my will was iron. The years of labor, of building, of enduring storms and loss had shaped me into more than a man who could be manipulated. I was still Arthur Langley, the man who stood on scaffolds and built homes from dust. And I would rebuild myself now, not for them, but for the truth of what family should mean. Michael's voice cut through, low and threatening. "If you do this, we'll contest it. We'll drag it through court. It'll ruin everything." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure the truth is written so deep it can't be erased." Their anger boiled, but I no longer felt cornered. The collapse had passed. What remained was clarity, a plan forming in quiet precision. Tomorrow I would sit in a lawyer's office. Tomorrow I would carve their names out of the future they thought they owned. The standoff broke when Michael muttered, "This isn't over," and turned toward the door. Karen followed, her face pale but her eyes burning. The slam of the door shook the frames on the wall. Silence returned, thick and charged. Emily turned to me, her eyes bright with both pride and fear. "Grandpa, what if they try again?" I slid the folder into my coat pocket close against my chest. "Then they'll find nothing left to take." The clock ticked heavily on the mantel. The night outside deepened shadows, stretching long across the floor. And then, faint but clear, came the sound of a car engine idling just beyond the yard. Emily's head whipped towards the window, her voice hushed. "They're not leaving." The low growl of the engine outside didn't fade. It idled in the dark, like a presence waiting like wolves just beyond the tree line. Emily stayed by the window, her body tense, but I reached for my coat, sliding the folder deeper into the inner pocket. The paper crackled close to my chest, a heartbeat of its own. "They want you to be afraid," Emily whispered. "I've lived through harder nights," I said. Though the truth was, my ribs ached, my stitches pulled with every breath, and the weight of 71 years pressed heavy on my back. Still the decision stood. Tomorrow would not wait. Sleep came in fragments, shadows shifting across the ceiling while headlights swept the curtains now and then. But dawn arrived pale and cold, and with it a clarity that burned away fear. By mid-morning I was in the lawyer's office downtown. The waiting room smelled of leather and old paper, the carpet worn, where countless feet had paced before me. Emily sat beside me, her hand wrapped around mine, steadying me when the door finally opened, and a tall man with gray hair called my name. "Mr. Langley." His office was lined with shelves of law books, spines, cracked titles, and gold lettering. The window looked out over the courthouse square, where pigeons wheeled above the statue of a soldier. I sat heavily in the chair opposite his desk, my coat still buttoned, the folder pressed against my chest. "What brings you in today?" he asked. I pulled the folder free, laying it on the desk with a weight that seemed louder than paper should carry. "I want to rewrite this." "Entirely?" He studied me, his brow lifting slightly. "That's no small step, Mr. Langley." "I know," I said. "But my children left me in a hospital lobby. My granddaughter came for me. That's the truth I need this paper to hold." Emily sat quietly, her cheeks flushed with emotion. The lawyer looked at her, then back at me, and nodded slowly. He opened the folder, adjusting his glasses, and the scratching of his pen began. For the first time in weeks, a calm settled over me. Every word he wrote was a stone in a new foundation, one I chose, one that couldn't be pried apart by greed. The anger that had burned through me transformed into something sharper, cleaner resolve. But then the door opened without a knock. Michael's voice cut through, loud and brash. "Dad," Emily gasped. My son strode into the room with Karen at his side, their faces flushed from anger and haste. The secretary followed, flustered, protesting that they had no appointment, but Michael brushed her off. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his eyes darting to the folder on the desk. The lawyer straightened his hand, steady on the papers. "Sir, you'll have to leave. This is a confidential consultation." Karen's voice rose shrill with panic. "Dad, don't do this. You're not thinking clearly. They're manipulating you. I repeated, my voice low but firm. "The only person who stood for me was Emily. The only manipulation is yours." Michael's face reddened, his control cracking. "You can't cut us out. We're your children." I met his gaze, holding it until his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty. Being my children should have meant more than blood. It should have meant presence. You chose absence. Karen's hands trembled, her voice breaking. "If Mom were here, she wouldn't let you do this." Margaret's face rose in my mind again, but not the way they wanted. I remembered her telling me after one of Michael's tantrums that respect wasn't inherited. It was earned every day. The memory cut through their words like light through fog. The lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the standoff. "Mr. Langley, are you ready to proceed with instructions?" I nodded. "Yes. My assets go to a local charity. And Emily," I turned to her, watching her eyes widen in shock, "will serve as executor. She is the one I trust." Michael stepped forward, his hand slamming the desk. "This is insane. We'll fight it. We'll drag this through court until there's nothing left." The lawyer's voice stayed calm, cool as stone. "You may try, but the will is binding once signed, and Mr. Langley's wishes are clear." Michael's bravado faltered for the first time. His eyes darted between me and the lawyer, the panic seeping through his anger. Karen's lips trembled, words failing her. Emily leaned closer to me, her whisper trembling. "Grandpa, are you sure?" I looked at her, at the steadiness in her eyes despite the storm around us, and felt the rise of something fierce and unshakable. "I've never been more sure." The lawyer slid the papers across the desk, his pen resting atop them. The moment crackled like the air before lightning. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen, but not from weakness, from the weight of choice. Michael lunged forward, his voice breaking into a shout. "Don't you dare!" Emily rose, stepping between us, her back straight, her shoulders squared. "Enough," she said, her voice sharp as glass. Michael froze, his own daughter standing as the wall he couldn't breach. His face twisted, panic, now plain sweat beading on his temple. And in that silence I set the pen to paper. The ink bled into the page, my name writing itself firm and final across the lines. When I looked up, Michael's face had drained pale. Karen covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. For the first time, they looked not greedy, not arrogant, but powerless. And then the lawyer spoke, sliding the signed document back into the folder. It's done. The clock on the wall ticked, each sound heavy as a nail sealing a coffin. Emily squeezed my hand under the desk, her grip steady, and I let out a long breath. But as Michael and Karen turned to leave, fury sharp in their eyes, Karen stopped in the doorway. She turned back, her voice low, chilling. If you think this ends here, you don't know us at all. The ride home from the lawyer's office was quiet, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the thick air that comes before a storm. Emily kept glancing at me from the driver's seat, her knuckles tight on the wheel, her lips pressed thin. I sat with the folder resting across my lap, feeling its weight not just in paper, but in blood and years. When we turned into the driveway, they were already there. Michael's truck, Karen's car, both parked crooked across the gravel, like they had claimed the ground itself. Michael stood by the porch with his arms crossed, his face carved into stone, while Karen paced near the steps, her phone in her hand. Emily cut the engine. They followed us, she whispered. I nodded slowly. They were always going to. We stepped out together, the gravel crunching underfoot. Michael's voice came sharp across the yard. What the hell have you done? I didn't flinch. I told the truth on paper. Karen shoved the phone into her purse and rushed forward. You're destroying this family. Do you understand that you're tearing it apart? Emily answered before I could. No. You did that when you left him in a hospital chair. Michael's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. We made a mistake, all right. But you don't throw away your own kids for one mistake. One mistake. My voice rose deep and shaking the air. It wasn't one mistake. It was years. Years of taking, of asking, of vanishing when it mattered most. Your mother held this family together. When she died, you let the rope slip from your hands. Michael stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with anger. You're punishing us for grief. You don't get to rewrite everything because you're bitter. I stared at him, the boy I once taught to hammer nails straight, the man who now used his strength to press me down. I'm not bitter. I'm awake. Karen's eyes shimmered with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were fear. We'll be ruined, she whispered. Do you know what people will say when they hear you cut your children out? They'll say you lost your mind. The words hit hard, because somewhere deep I feared it too, that age had blurred my judgment, that grief had sharpened anger into something reckless. But then I felt Emily's hand on my arm, steady, present, real. And I knew the difference between madness and clarity. You abandoned me, I said, my voice breaking but holding firm. And then you came back, not with love, not with care, but with your hands out. That isn't family. That's theft with polite words. Michael's face twisted. You owe us. You raised us to expect it. You told us we'd be taken care of. I raised you to be men and women who stood on their own. What you expect now is a lie you wrote for yourselves. The argument swelled like thunder voices, clashing words jagged. Emily shouted back at them, her voice fierce, telling them they'd forfeited their right to his trust. Karen screamed over her, insisting blood could not be erased. Michael slammed his fist against the porch railing, the wood splintering under his strength. And then the air broke with sudden quiet. I lifted the folder and held it against my chest. It's done, I said. Signed, sealed, witnessed. You can scream until your throats bleed, but the ink won't fade. Michael's face drained of color, the reality sinking in his power, slipping. Karen stumbled back a step, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, I saw not arrogance, but fear in both of them. But before the silence could settle, Emily gasped, her gaze snapping past them toward the street. A car I didn't recognize had pulled up sleek and dark with tinted windows. The door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. His shoes crunched the gravel as he approached, calm and deliberate. Michael turned sharply. "Who the hell are you?" The man's voice was smooth, practiced. "I'm here representing another interested party." His eyes landed on me, cold and certain. "Mr. Langley, your children have already taken steps. There are documents filed, claims of mental incapacity. I'm here to advise you that this matter has escalated." Emily's breath caught. "They did what?" Karen's face burned crimson, but she didn't deny it. Michael said nothing, only stood rigid, his eyes darting between me and the stranger. The briefcase clicked open, the lawyer pulling free a stack of papers thick as a brick, the edges sharp in the evening light. "You see," he said, laying them on the hood of Michael's truck, "this isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is war." The papers on the hood of the truck looked heavy enough to crush the air around us. The suited man adjusted his tie, his expression calm in a way that only money can buy. Michael stood stiff, his fists tight at his sides, while Karen's hands trembled as she tried to steady her breath. Emily pressed close to me, her small frame steady her presence, the only warmth in that cold driveway. I didn't move toward the stack. I didn't need to. I knew what it was: allegations, affidavits, signatures written in desperation. Attempts to strip me of my own name, to call me unfit, incapable, weak. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed on me like the beams I once carried, the kind that bowed your back and stole the breath from your lungs. But then I remembered the scaffolds, the hammer in my hands, the way I had stood steady on narrow planks while storms rolled across the sky. I had learned a long time ago that balance wasn't something you begged for. It was something you claimed. I turned to Michael and Karen, my voice steady, though my chest ached. "Do you know what it means to leave a man alone in a hospital chair, to look at your father and see only a wallet, only a key to a door you want opened? That's not family. That's theft dressed in bloodlines." Michael's jaw clenched, but his eyes faltered for a heartbeat, as though some part of him knew the truth of it. Karen's tears spilled, though, whether from regret or fear, I couldn't tell. I looked past them up at the house I had built with Margaret. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, but it stood. Every board nailed with hands that believed family meant shelter, not currency. I thought of Margaret's voice again, telling me not to be too hard to forgive, to trust the circle of family even when it frayed. I wished she were here to tell me if I was wrong now, if my resolve had cut too deep. But then Emily's hand found mine, warm and certain. And I knew forgiveness wasn't the same as surrender. Self-respect wasn't cruelty. It was the line you drew when love turned into demand, when giving became erasure. I faced them fully, my voice carrying through the yard, low and final. "You want to drag my name through court, call me unfit, erase my choices. Do it. But you'll never erase the truth. You'll never erase who came for me and who left me to sit alone. Justice isn't always about the law. Sometimes it's simply about memory." The suited man gathered his papers, lips pressed into a thin smile, already calculating his billable hours. Michael turned away, fury burning under his skin, while Karen lingered, her tears streaking her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I stepped back toward the porch with Emily, each step heavy but sure. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet, the kind of colors that make you pause even in grief. I thought of how small moments endure longer than any will, longer than any inheritance. The laughter of children playing under fireworks, the smell of sawdust on my clothes after a long day, the way Margaret's hand used to rest against mine when the house grew quiet. Those were the real legacy, the ones no paper could dictate. Emily helped me into the chair by the window, the one where I could see the oak tree in the yard. Its branches stretched wide, strong against the fading light. The initials carved into its bark had grown with the tree, weathered but unbroken. They told a story, too, of love once given, of family once close. I let the silence fill me, not with despair, but with something steadier. Self-respect, forgiveness, justice. None of them were neat, none of them easy, but they were mine to define. And as long as I could still draw a breath, I would not let anyone take that from me. I closed my eyes, leaning back, the murmur of crickets rising outside, the smell of cut grass drifting through the screen. The fight wasn't over. Battles never end clean. But inside me there was a strange calm. Because for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. Thanks for listening to the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment to let us know what you think.